Rain lashed across the dry Texas plains like heaven itself was crying. A woman stumbled down the muddy road, her torn shawl clinging to her shoulders, two small children clutched against her. Her name was Clara Whitfield, and she had lost everything, her husband to a fever, her home to debt collectors, and her hope to the endless miles of dust and grief. When she saw the faint glow of a ranch house through the storm, she whispered a silent prayer that someone inside might still believe in mercy. Inside the Lambert Ranch, a tall man with quiet eyes stood by the fire. Luke Lambert was known across the county as the cowboy who kept to himself. He'd buried his parents too young and built his ranch with his own two hands. When the knock came, frantic, desperate, he almost didn't answer. But something in the sound made him move. Opening the door, he found Clara on her knees, her children trembling behind her. Her voice was barely a breath. "Please, take my children, they'll die out here." Luke froze. Her words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. The children's faces were pale, their clothes soaked through. He could see the same fear he'd felt once when he was left alone in the world. He bent down slowly, his voice rough but gentle. "Ma'am, get up. You and your little ones ain't dying tonight." He led them inside, wrapped them in blankets, and set a pot of stew to warm. The woman sobbed quietly as the children ate, their small hands shaking around the spoons. When the storm eased, Clara tried to stand. "I can't stay. The sheriff's men are after me for the debts. They'll come for the children too." Luke frowned, his jaw tightening. "No one's talkin', any child from my land," he said firmly. "You'll rest here tonight, and tomorrow we'll see what's right." He didn't know why he cared so much. Maybe because in those children's eyes, he saw the same loneliness he'd fought all his life. That night, as thunder rolled away into silence, Luke sat by the fire watching Clara sleep beside her children. There was exhaustion in her face, but something else too, strength. He remembered his mother's voice, soft and trembling, saying before she died, "Don't let good people suffer if you can help it." Maybe this was what she'd meant. Maybe God had sent this woman to remind him that kindness still mattered in a hard world. At dawn, Clara awoke to the smell of coffee and fresh bread. For a moment, she forgot her fears. The ranch stretched out under a golden sky, white and peaceful. Luke stood by the corral, saddling his horse. She walked out, hesitant. "You've done too much already," she said softly. "We'll be on our way." Luke turned, his hat shadowing his face. "You got no place to go, and I got more land than I can work. Stay till you're ready." His tone left no room for argument. Days turned into weeks. Clara helped in the kitchen, mended shirts, and tended the animals. Her children laughed again, chasing the chickens, playing with Luke's old shepherd dog, Duke. For the first time since her husband's death, Clara smiled without forcing it. Luke watched from afar, pretending not to care, but the sight stirred something deep in him. He'd thought his life was meant to be quiet, but now the silence felt different, almost lonely when they weren't around. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Luke found Clara hanging laundry near the barn. "You ever think about stayin'?" he asked, his voice low. She froze, eyes wide with surprise. "I don't belong here," she murmured. "This is your home." Luke stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Home's just a word till there's someone to share it with." She didn't answer, but her heart beat faster. The air between them was thick with something unspoken. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. Word reached town that the debt collectors had tracked Clara's trail. Sheriff Dunley, a man more loyal to money than justice, was riding toward Lambert Ranch with two armed men. Luke heard from the blacksmith that morning and felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. He saddled his horse without a word and rode hard back home, the wind cutting through him like a warning. He knew what men like Dunley were capable of. When he arrived, Clara was feeding the children. He burst through the door. "Pack what you can," he said quickly. "They're comin'." Her face drained of color. "Please, not again," she whispered. "I can't lose them." Luke placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. "You won't. Not while I'm standin'." His voice had the weight of a promise, the kind that could break bones if betrayed. As dust clouds rose on the horizon, the ranch grew tense. Luke loaded his rifle and stood on the porch, watching the riders approach. Clara hid the children inside, her hands trembling as she clutched the little girl's shawl. Every sound, every hoofbeat, felt like the end of peace. Luke spat into the dirt, his jaw set. "This ranch ain't for sale, and neither are those children," he muttered. When the sheriff's men arrived, their leader sneered. "You're harboring fugitives, Lambert. Hand over the woman and her brats." Luke didn't move. "They ain't fugitives. They're under my protection." One of the men reached for his gun, but Luke was faster. The warning shot split the air, sending the buzzards flying. "Try again," Luke said coldly. The sheriff hesitated. There was something in the cowboy's eyes that made even desperate men think twice. The standoff stretched in the burning sun. Clara clutched her children, praying Luke wouldn't be hurt for her sake. But when Dunley finally backed down, spitting curses, Luke only said, "Tell your boss if he wants them, he'll have to go through me." The men turned their horses and rode away, their threats fading with the wind. Only then did Luke lower his gun, his breath unsteady. Clara rushed out, tears streaming. "You could have been killed," she cried. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but some things are worth standing for." That night, the ranch was silent except for the crackle of the fire. Clara sat across from Luke, her eyes glistening in the flickering light. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. Luke looked at her for a long moment. "Because no one ever did it for me," he said simply. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it brushed his. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind softened, and for the first time, the world seemed at peace. The days after the standoff were uneasy. Though the sheriff had backed down, Luke knew men like him didn't quit so easily. He spent his mornings patrolling the ridge, eyes scanning the horizon for riders. Clara noticed the sleepless nights he hid behind his quiet strength. She began leaving a cup of coffee on the porch for him each dawn, a small gesture that said more than words ever could. The bond between them grew, rooted in fear but blooming in trust. One evening, as the sky blushed pink over the plains, Clara found Luke mending a fence by lantern light. "You can't watch over us forever," she said softly. He looked up, his face streaked with dust. "Maybe not forever," he admitted, "but long enough to make sure you're safe." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You already have." For the first time, Luke saw her not as someone needing rescue, but as someone who had survived more than most men he knew. A few nights later, while Clara was tucking the children into bed, she heard the distant echo of gunfire. Luke burst through the door moments later, blood on his sleeve. "They're back," he said through gritted teeth. 3 men this time, armed and mean. Clara's heart froze. "We have to run," she whispered, but Luke shook his head. "No, we finish this here." He loaded his rifle and stood by the window, the glow of firelight carving sharp lines across his determined face. Outside, shadows moved between the trees. Clara clutched her children close as Luke stepped out into the night, the wind whipping through the dry grass. "Lambert," a voice shouted, "you can't protect him forever." Luke raised his rifle, his voice calm but cold. "I can damn well try." The gunfight that followed was fierce, bullets sparking off wood, echoing across the valley. Luke fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything worth protecting. When the dust settled, 2 of the attackers lay wounded, the third fled into the hills. Luke stood swaying, blood seeping from his arm. Clara ran to him, her tears falling hot against his skin. "You're hurt," she cried. "It's nothin'," he murmured, but his knees gave way. She caught him before he fell, whispering, "Don't you dare leave us." He smiled faintly. "Didn't plan to." That night, she stayed by his side, pressing cloth to his wound, whispering prayers until dawn chased away the darkness. Weeks passed. The sheriff never returned. Word had spread that Lambert Ranch was protected by a man who wouldn't bow to threats. Luke healed slowly, though the scar on his arm became a permanent reminder of what he'd risked. Clara took charge of the ranch while he recovered, proving herself stronger than anyone had imagined. Luke watched her from the porch, the children laughing in the yard, and realized the ranch didn't feel empty anymore. It finally felt alive. One morning, Luke found the little boy, Tommy, sitting by the corral, watching the horses. "You think you'll ride one someday?" Luke asked. The boy nodded shyly. "Mama says you're the bravest man she ever met." Luke chuckled softly, the sound rusty but warm. "Your mama gives me too much credit." The boy tilted his head. "You make her smile." She didn't smile before. Those simple words hit Luke harder than a bullet. Maybe that was what courage really was, not fighting men, but giving someone back their smile. That evening, as the family sat by the fire, Clara spoke quietly. "I can't keep pretending this isn't your home too." Luke frowned, unsure of her meaning. She took a deep breath. When you opened your door that night, you didn't just save us. You gave us a reason to hope again. If you'll have us, we'd like to stay. For a long moment, Luke said nothing. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, rough fingers trembling. Reckon I'd be a fool to say no. Spring came early that year. Wildflowers blanketed the hills, and laughter filled the air around the Lambert ranch. The children followed Luke everywhere, feeding the horses, helping mend fences, even trying to lasso Duke, who tolerated them with patient eyes. Clara sang while she worked, her voice carrying softly across the fields. Luke couldn't remember the last time the place had felt so full of life. He realized then that family wasn't something you were born with, it was something you chose, over and over again. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the sheriff's office. Luke unfolded it slowly while Clara watched. It was official notice that her debts had been forgiven, the bank had dropped the claim, fearing more trouble with the Lambert man. Clara's eyes filled with tears. It's over, she whispered. Luke smiled faintly. About time the world gave you a fair shake. She hugged him suddenly, without hesitation, and for once, he didn't pull away. The weight of all their pain seemed to melt into the dusty light. Months later, under a sky painted with stars, Luke stood on the porch, watching the children chase fireflies. Clara joined him, her hair loose in the breeze. Hard to believe how much can change, she said softly. Luke nodded. Ain't the land that changes. It's the hearts. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. You changed ours. He looked down at her, his eyes gentle. Guess you changed mine too. They stood there in silence, the night wrapping around them like a promise. Years passed, and the story of the cowboy who took in a stranger's children spread across the plains. Folks said he was a hard man once, until love softened him the way rain softens dry earth. Others said Clara's prayer that night in the storm had been answered by more than just a kind man, it had been answered by fate itself. But to Luke and Clara, none of that mattered. They didn't need legends or praise. They had each other, and that was enough. On the anniversary of that first stormy night, Clara lit a single lantern by the window, a quiet thank you to the stranger who had opened his door and changed their destiny. Luke came up behind her, resting his hand on her waist. Still remember that night, he said. So do I, she whispered. And every moment since. Their eyes met, and the years between them seemed to fade away. Outside, the wind carried the laughter of their children, strong, free, and unafraid. As the lantern flickered, Clara smiled through her tears. You know, when I begged you to take my children, I never thought you'd take my heart too. Luke chuckled softly. Reckon I didn't have a choice. You and those young'uns stormed right into my life. He tipped his hat, teasing, but there was tenderness in his voice. Ain't never been the same since. She leaned in and kissed him, slow and grateful. The world beyond the ranch faded into quiet peace. From that night on, no storm ever felt quite as dark. The Lambert Ranch became known not just for its cattle or wide fields, but for the family that laughter built. Every traveler passing by said they could feel it, the warmth of love that had beaten back despair. Luke often stood at the gate at sunset, watching his children ride, his wife smiling beside him, and thought about the simple words that had started it all, take my children. He had taken them, and found his life instead.